This class is made possible by our kind supporters over at Patreon. Thank you and enjoy the class. Shalom everyone and welcome to our new weekly Soul of the Parsha class. We are now jumping in to the Parsha Shoftim. Shoftim means judges or magistrates. And our topic for today is what is the role of trust in education. We're talking about education in the broadest sense. It could be educating our kids, educating our students, or even educating ourselves. And we want to ask, what is the role of trust in education? And what is the proper balance between authority and trust? How much of the educational system or the educational outlook should be based on authority? How much emphasis should be placed on authority versus how much emphasis should be placed on trust? And what is the correct formula, if we may say so, for balancing the two? So we're starting by looking at the opening verses of the Parsha. This year we're focusing on just the openings of the Parashot. And the Parsha opens with the following verse. I'm going to read it first in Hebrew, then in English. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha bechol she'arecha. אשר השם אלוקיך נותן לך, לשבטיך, ושפטו את העם משפט צדק. So translated into English, it goes the following. You shall appoint judges or magistrates, that's the word shoftim, and also officials or bailiffs. These are two translations for the Hebrew word shotrim. Shotrim, the most common translation would be police officers. So the traditional translations go officials, or like I said, officers, or bailiffs. And the continuation is for your tribes, in all the settlements that the Lord your God is giving to you, and they shall govern the people with due justice, mishpat tzedek. So the Parsha opens with two authoritative figures, the shoftim, judges, and the shotrim, the police officers or officials or bailiffs. What is the difference between the two? So Rashi says the following. He says, the judges, the shoftim, are those who pronounce the sentence. They say what's right and what's wrong, and who's guilty and who's innocent, and they just say what it is. They judge, they think, and they say what they believe to be the truth. Whereas the shotrim, the other figure of authority, are those who chastise the people at the judge's orders, beating and binding the recalcitrant with a stick and a strap until he accepts the judge's sentence. Right? This is a translation of Rashi. Very simply put, the shotrim, the police officers or the bailiffs, are the ones making sure that what the judges say is followed. You need someone who, the judge says someone is guilty, but you need someone to then hold him by the hand, make sure he doesn't run away, and lead him to his punishment, whatever it may be. So you need people with actual physical strength executing, implementing what the judges are saying. Very simple, very, very common sense. So that's how the Parsha opens. You need shoftim and you need shotrim, and you have to have both. And it's very common sense, very simple. But then we have something very interesting, and that we wouldn't have maybe necessarily connected the two, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe made a very beautiful and very amazing, very thought-provoking connection. A verse in the opening chapter of Isaiah, of the prophet Yeshayahu. At the end of chapter 1, verse 26, he says, again, first Hebrew then English, "Ve'ashiva shoftaich kevarishona v'yoatzaich kevatchila." I will restore your magistrates, your shoftim, as of old, and your counselors as of yore. That's the translation that I chose. I shall restore your judges like it was before, judges or magistrates, shoftim, and I will also restore your yoatzim, counselors. So, again, we have two figures of authority, but they're not the same. And in the parasha, we have shoftim and shotrim, with the parsha being called, by the way, just after the Shoftim. The parsha isn't called Shoftim v'Shotrim, it's just called Shoftim, but the very next word is Shotrim. But in Yeshayahu, we see that your judges that you miss, the judges, the holy judges that are God-fearing, that judge according to the Torah, you don't have them now. You have, maybe you're ruled by the laws of foreign nations and non-Torah laws, but as part of redemption, I'm going to restore your judges as of old. But then the next figure of authority we would maybe expect, it would be the Shotrim. Right? Just like in our parsha it says you need Shoftim and Shotrim, judges and police officers. And also in the future I will restore those two figures. But the difference is that the judges are restored, but the police officers are replaced by counselors. So we could say, well, we don't have to necessarily connect the two verses, and obviously, in redemption also it'll be, well, it depends what your picture of redemption is. But for example, Maimonides' picture of redemption is that it's a is that olam keminahago noheg. The world will, the same laws of nature and of human nature will apply in the future also, but there will be a Mashiach, a king, a very righteous king, and we won't be ruled over by other nations, but otherwise it's going to be a regular world, and that means that we're also going to have Shotrim. But there is another reading in which the Messianic days to come, human nature will change. And this opens the possibility that the counselors are not just another figure, that we have, three figures of authority that we need to talk about, that are the judges and the Shotrim, police officers, and the counselors, but that if we put the two verses one next to the other, we get the idea that the police officers will be replaced by counselors. So what does this mean? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, this signifies or suggests that in the future, humankind will change so much that we are not going to need any police officers. It's a bit like if you read some anarchists, anarchist doesn't sound like a good word because they don't believe in any laws. But if you read the anarchist ideologues and the people who put forth the anarchist agenda, they're very optimistic in nature. They believe that human nature is very, very good and kind, and it's ruined by institutions. And if only you would have anarchy, then the positive good nature of humankind will come forth, and everyone will be naturally good. So it turns out, according to this idea, which the Rebbe is putting forward, that in the future we're going to be a little bit of anarchists. So we're still going to have judges. So it's not a total anarchy, because there will be judges who will proclaim what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad. It's not going to be total anarchy. But it's going to be the very opposite of a police state, or not just a police state. A police state is a state run by the police, but it's going to be a non-police state. It's going to be a state of no police, no policing, no chasing, no suspicions. The judge will proclaim what's true and what's right, and we're just going to hear it and identify and say he's absolutely right. I can see the truth of his words. And we are going to need some counselors to mediate between the judges and us. If it was just the judges and us would, and we would be just, fully understanding and appreciating and following the judges, we wouldn't need any, we would just need to throw away the Shotrim and only have Shoftim. But that's not what comes from the verse in Isaiah. It comes from the verse in Isaiah that we're still going to need people who would maybe explain the judgment, explain the laws of God, but they're not going to police us. They're not going to put, handcuffs and drag us and warn us that if we're not going to do this, they're going to beat us. Nothing like this. They're just going to counsel us. They're going to maybe help us be convinced of the truth of what the judges have just said. And then, and that's all it's going to take. We're just going to listen to the counselors, and we're going to go through maybe a process of counseling. And at the end of it, we will accept what the judges have said, and will obey. And that's how it's going to be. This is the Messianic days to come. It goes very beautifully with something that's written in the Zohar. The Zohar says something very revolutionary. Some people would say frightening. Other people would find exhilarating. The Zohar says at one point, actually in 2 points, the Zohar says that the Zohar has a new description of the 613 commandments of the Torah. They're not called commandments in those 2 places. They're called 613 pieces of advice. Tariag 18. 18 is the Aramaic for eitzot. Eitzot is advice, and the word here is yo'atzaich, your counselors, your advisors. In Hebrew it's the same word. We use counselors, and we can say advisors. In Hebrew it's the same word. It's yo'atzim. Sorry. So the idea that in the future the police officers will be replaced by counselors or advisors is hinted at already in the Zohar, that says that if we look at the commandments from a Kabbalistic perspective, i.e. from an inner Torah perspective, looking at it through the inner dimension of the Torah, the Pnimiyut Torah, then the mitzvot, and the mitzvot commandments, they suggest there is a commander, there's someone giving out the commandments, and then there's someone below him who needs to just obey, and that's how it's supposed to be. But if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar says that the commandments are truly, on the inside, advice, it sheds completely new light on the entire thing that's called Torah and commandments. The usage of terms like, you have to observe Shabbat, or you mustn't steal, or you need to observe the holidays, or you mustn't eat something that's not kosher, it becomes not the words of a king or a leader of the army. It's something like a good friend telling you something like, you have to read this book, or you have to watch this movie, or you mustn't do that, it's really bad for you. When a friend addresses you with those words, you don't feel that they're your commander-in-chief, that they're your king, or that they're your, authoritative parent. You feel that they have your best interest in mind. And when they use words like, you gotta watch this movie, you have to watch this movie, although the words they're using are words that they're phrased a bit like a commandment, a bit like a command. You have to do this. Or no, don't do this, you mustn't do this. But the way it's said, and the relationship between you, makes it very, very clear that they're not going to do anything to you if you don't watch the movie. Or if you go in and do the thing that they told you not to do. Because they're your friends. They're not going to stop you physically. They're not going to be police officers. They're giving you they're saying those words as advisors, as counselors, as friends. They're using terminology of a commandment. You have to watch this movie. But what they mean is, I really urge you, I really think it'll be good for you. You'll thank me if you read that book or watch that movie. So if we read the Zohar, and the Zohar says that the commandments are really advice, it completely changes the way we listen to all the commandments of the Torah. The Torah is using words like, you have to, or bad things will happen, like klalot, like curses, if you don't do this, and all this language. But if you then, the verses remain the same. But if you listen to the verses using the lens or the screen of the Zohar terminology, which says the commandments are really, really just 613 pieces of advice, then you realize God is telling you something like a good friend, listen, I have this amazing treasure called Shabbat. It's the most amazing thing in the world. You just have to observe it. You have to do it. It's just like a friend saying, you have to watch this movie. it's the best thing in the world. You'll be so happy if you observe Shabbat. It completely changes how we listen to the Torah. Okay, so the thing is that that's not what the verse says in our parsha. The verse in our parsha does say we need judges and we need shotrim, we need police officers or bailiffs or people actually making sure we do this. But the Isaiah verse that talks about the advisors or the counselors, it sort of points at a trajectory in which we're hoping, or we're directing ourselves towards a future in which police officers will be redundant, in which we won't need them anymore. It'll all be trust-based. God will trust us to just rely on counselors, not police officers. Counselors will sit there and convince us, and a counselor is basically explaining to you why something is good for you, but he doesn't force you to do it. And this is the ideal situation according to this concept. So the Rebbe says, in the future we're not going to need police officers. It'll be just counselors. Why? Basically, because we're not going to have Yetzer Hara. We're not going to have the evil inclination. Or it'll not have such a strong hold on us. We'll be able to internally, authentically identify with the good. We'll need some, coaxing. We'll need advisors. That just the truth of the judges will be maybe too hard to accept. We're going to need some, kind of learning curve, or a getting used to something curve, and that's what the counselors are for. But we're not going to be forced. We're not going to need being forced to do anything, because the counselors will be enough. We'll listen. We'll hear them, and the truth of their words will touch our hearts. And once we recognize the truth, we'll have enough power and energy and goodwill. That's a good word for this class. We'll have enough goodwill to follow the words of the advisors. Now, this topic is it's a point of argument that's very, very deep in human culture. Should we treat people in general, and little people, kids in particular, assuming that they will not heed words of truth and wisdom? That is, that man's evil inclination is very, very powerful, and therefore we're going to need a lot of systems of authority, because we can't trust people's goodwill, because many people's will isn't good. It's a bad will. And if they're not going to be watched or warned or threatened with punishments, or also given incentives to do good, they will not do good. Mankind, according to this view, so we have basically, it's two views. The view that comes from the Parsha and the view that comes from the Prophet. The view that comes from the Parsha is very realistic and very pessimistic. The two go together, because this world has a lot of evil in it. So if you're realistic, you're also pessimistic. It goes together. So one view is very realistic and pessimistic in nature, and it would say you can't trust people's goodwill. People have tried to trust other people's goodwill, and they were cheated and betrayed and hurt, and we all know this. It's naive to think otherwise. So you need prisons, and you also need, if you want people to do something good, they need incentives. It's two things you need, because people will not consider other people's benefit unless they have an incentive to do so, and they will not abstain from doing something evil if they're not threatened by some negative scenario that's going to befall them. Then there is another view, and the other view, which is reflected in the Prophet, the other view is that people are in nature very good, and they just need to be trusted. And if they're trusted, and if they're not ruined by a system that diminishes them and pushes down on them and tells them that they're bad, or even suspects them that they're bad, which they then internalize and think of themselves as bad, and they become bad, according to this view, ultimately we wouldn't need any laws, and we can have, for example, so if we're talking about education, the difference between the two views will translate into a school system that's very, very authoritative, in which the pupil, the student, needs to fear the system and to fear the teacher, and punishments need to be realized, need to be executed. Executed sounds like execution. I mean, the punishments need to be carried out. That's what I meant. And you have to have this, because if you're not going to have this, your school system or your family, it'll be a state of anarchy. The kids will do what they want, and because what they want is they're all very egoistic. The more realistic or pessimistic approach says people are egoistic in nature. That's how they are. That's just the way it is. Don't be naive to think otherwise. So you're going to need a school system that has a lot of authority, and the element of fear will need to be very strong in that system. And then things will work out, and the kids will do what they need to do, and they'll be up on time, and they'll give in their homeworks, and they'll be very much afraid of doing something that's wrong, that's against the rule or the code. Then the other view would say, no, you need a trust-based system. You need to minimize the authority and the fear and the punishments, and you need to tell the students, you know what, I trust you. I trust you that you want to learn, you want to advance, you want to do good, you want to have good grades, and I'm not going to check I'm going to leave the class now, and I'm not going to check if you do your assignment or you don't do it. I trust you. And that trust will also help them actually do what you want them to do. And they can be trusted. And the extreme case would be something like a democratic school. And there are also degrees of democratic schools. There are all kinds of ways of going about this. But the most extreme view is that you don't have to, there's no rule, or there's no obligation to enter any class or do any exam. Maybe even you don't have any exams in the more extreme cases of democratic open schools, totally liberal schools. And of course, it's a spectrum. There are many, many views and many ways of being in between. But the poles will be something like a very, very harsh school with a lot of rules. And at the other end of the spectrum would have an open democratic school that you don't have to do anything. Nobody's looking, nobody's checking. And if you want to go into the classes, you go. If you wanna play music, you play music. If you want to take an exam, you take the exam. If you don't want to take it, you don't take it. And we trust you. And maybe you're not yet ready. Maybe you'll be ready tomorrow. It's up to you. Whenever you want, you'll do. This has been a very, very deep point of argumentation. And it's very much a right-wing, left-wing issue. And we see this all the way back in the 18th century, just when the concepts of right and left began. So the classical examples are, in the 18th century, it would be Thomas Hobbes, the British philosopher. He is the right-wing figure here, who thinks that mankind is evil in nature, negative in nature, egoistic in nature, and they need a very strong government system that will place them in check and make sure that they don't devour one another alive. That's what he calls the state of nature. State of nature is everyone is killing everyone or trying to run over everyone in order to advance their own egoistic goals. And on the left side of the aisle, we had Jean-Jacques Russo. He was a French philosopher, and he was extremely romantic. He's one of the fathers of Romanticism. He was romantic in his view of human nature, humankind. And he says humankind is kind, and people are good. They're ruined by authoritative systems. And the ultimate ideal education is an education that does not interfere with the natural growth of the child. And if you interfere, if you the less you interfere, the better, and the child will grow into this beautiful, kind, loving, caring human being. A modern-day philosopher called Thomas Sowell, American, very interesting philosopher, conservative, he tried to analyze this. He tried to analyze the basic difference between right and left. He wanted to know, why is it that on a variety of issues that don't seem to be connected to one another, like economics, abortion, nationalism versus cosmopolitanism, you constant, or even climate change, you constantly see that people on the right take one point of view. Like, for example, they would be pro-capitalism, they would be anti-abortion, they wouldn't fear so much about climate change, they would be suspicious of the very frightening scenarios pointed out by the Greens, and it's totally different issues. Why is it that constantly, almost entirely consistently, people on the right you can pretty much guess what their opinion would be about a certain topic, and vice versa. On the left, you could guess that they're going to take up the opposite opinion. And he says, why is this? There must be an underlying common denominator. There must be something, and he called this that underneath the different points of contention and the different areas that they're arguing about, there is an underlying vision. So his book on the topic was called A Conflict of Visions. He says, really, what the left and right are arguing about is not this issue or that issue. These are all offshoots of a basic vision. They have the basic different vision of the world and of humankind. And he starts the book by pointing out, and if he starts, that means that this for him is the most basic element within the two visions. He says the right, all in all, they view man as, the word he uses is constrained. Constrained means that man is limited, man is flawed, man is forever flawed, and there's a limit to how much altruistic he can be, and sometimes that limit is very near to where he is and with the way he's thinking. And this is how you have to work. You have to work with this, and there's no point in denying it. And it's only naive to assume or to hope that it'll somehow shed off his egoism. That's how we are. We're animals that are a little bit more advanced than animals, and our animal nature is too powerful, too strong, and just accept this. It's not pessimistic, it's realistic. That's what the people on the right would say. Man is constrained, limited. And you shouldn't be overly hopeful as to how much good they can do in the world. This obviously goes along with the verse in our parsha. Shoftim ve'shotrim. Judges aren't enough. You need shotrim. You need people to uphold the law and to make sure that the law is observed. Because man's nature isn't good. And they're going to, if the judge will tell them you're guilty, and the first opportunity that they can have to avoid punishment, they'll run away. That's how they are. But then he says the left has a different underlying assumption regarding humankind. And they believe that man is either very good in nature or can become good. Man is more malleable, changeable. And under the right circumstances, he will willingly do good. And that's why you see in the educational systems that conservatives and their school systems tend to have more rules and discipline and punishments and threats and so on. And who founds those very open schools, democratic schools? It's almost always people on the left. They're the ones pushing for having very, very much, a democratic school in which you're equal to the teacher and you do whatever you want, and we trust you, and we try to echo and reflect the goodness that's within you. So that's what he's saying. He's saying this is the first and most basic element distinguishing the right-wing outlook on life and the left-wing outlook on life, is whether you view man, and that's the right-wing view, as constrained and limited. And this would explain, for example, why you need religion. You need religion because we need God. Man isn't enough. Man is limited. Man needs God's words. We need tradition generally, not just religious tradition. We need traditional institutions because they check man's nature, that he wouldn't harm himself or do things that are foolish. And on the other hand, it also explains the left, that the left is much more forward-looking. He thinks we don't need those institutions, those traditional institutions. They're only diminishing our true selves, our true nature. They don't think we need to have God too much in our lives or at all in our lives. We need to become the new God. And we should be the ones. This is what humanism is ultimately all about. We become our own figures of authority. And again, in education, it comes about in these two school systems that we see that are again, there are always exceptions to every rule, but they're very much connected to right and left. Now, how do we go about finding truth in all of this? So this is very interesting. We have two verses. One is in the Torah. The Torah was given to us. It's eternal. There's an eternal truth embedded within it. However, it was given long ago, and we know that in the future it'll be revealed that the Torah we have is just the tip of an iceberg of a far grander, greater, bigger, wider, deeper Torah. That it'll be like, it says that our Torah is like a breath, just like a hevel, like a fleeting breath of air. All the Torah that we're saying, that we're teaching in our world, that we have taught so far, is like a hevel compared to the Messianic Torah we'll have in the future. And we get a glimpse or a taste of the Messianic Torah, where? In the prophets. Because the prophets are describing the future. And in the prophets, we have the verse that seems to suggest that we're not going to need policing around, and we're just going to need advisors. So it looks as if the Torah is more right-winged in nature, but the prophets are more left-leaning in nature. They're more left-wing. So the Torah, the written Torah, is at least in this sense, it's more right-wing, but the prophet's vision is more left-wing. That's what we see. And not just the future, but not just the prophet, but also the Kabbalistic terminology we used before, that the Zohar says that the commandments are really just pieces of advice. It goes along with Yoatzim, Eitzot. So we can. It's not just that the Torah is right-wing and the prophets are left-wing, but it seems like the revealed Torah is right-wing, and the inner dimension of the Torah is more left-wing. It's left-leaning. Let's ask something else. If we look at Hasidut, all this Bet Midrash is a Hasidic Bet Midrash, and we're trying to look at what Hasidut is all about. So we all know that religious people, almost always, they more identify or fully identify with the right-wing politics and not left-wing politics. It's just the way it is. The more really, because the right respects religion more and authority, and is always pro-religion, doesn't attack religion and religious institutions, and also doesn't attack the concept of a nation, for example, in the Jewish outlook. The concept of nationhood is very important. We're a nation, and we need to be distinct. If we're all cosmopolitan, it doesn't go along with being the Jewish people. That it's supposed to be differentiated from other peoples. So many reasons why the alliance between the religion and the right is the most obvious alliance, and it doesn't work well with the left. Every once in a while, you have some left-wing religious people, just like you have some secular right-wing people. You have some left-wing religious people, but it always strikes many people as very odd. and it's not very successful. There used to be in Israel a religious left-wing political party. It didn't last very long. There's not enough audience for it. However, we also know there's a famous story about the Rebbe Rayatz, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, that he was going on a train, and there were two Jews arguing about politics. It doesn't say what their argument was about. Well, we can assume in that period of time it was socialism or communism versus capitalism. That was the hottest topic. It's still a hot topic, but then it was the hottest topic in the world. And one was saying that Judaism favors the one view, and the other one said that Judaism favors the other view. And finally they turned to the Rebbe Rayatz. They told him, well, what do you think? You think Judaism is more pro this view? Again, assuming it was socialism, or it's more pro-capitalist? And then he told them something in the lines of, a Torah is not an ism. The Torah is not an ism. It's above all isms. It's the root of all isms, and it contains all isms. There is an element of truth in both isms, and we need to combine them. We see this, by the way, reflects very beautifully if we look at the third verse in our own parasha. The first verse is that you need, again, judges and officers, Shoftim v'Shotrim. And then if we jump 2 verses forward to verse number 3 in the parasha, which is really verse 20 in the chapter, then the verse says, Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, which in English means, justice, justice shall you pursue. What is the most obvious question about this verse? Why repeat the word justice? You can just say, justice shall you pursue, and that would be enough. So the Hasidic explanation is that the reason we're told, justice, justice shall you pursue, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, is because in every argument, in every conflict, in every debate, there's at least an element of truth to both sides. And very often, there's quite a few elements of truth in both sides. So you need to hear the justice of both sides of the argument. There is a side of justice to each side. The word tzedek in Hebrew is actually made up of the word tzad, which means side. There are 2 sides to every coin, 2 sides to every story. And there are 2 sides to every question about what is just. Both rights are justified, both sides are justified in some way. They can be justified. If you look at it from a certain perspective, you can see the truth in that side. So the word justice is made up of tzad and then kuf. What is kuf? Kuf is just a letter, but it's a letter that has a numerical value of 100. So we can say that each side believes that they're 100% right. We have a tzad kuf and a tzad kuf. A side that thinks it's 100% right, and a side that thinks that it is 100% right, which means that they both think that the other side is 0% right, because they hold on to all the 100%. But you as a judge, or you as a human being, you as a Jew, you need to observe the commandment of tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Pursue both sides of justice. And it may even be true, that it may even be possible that they actually are 100% true, both of them. If you're fully identified with one person's perspective, you have total empathy. If you have total empathy, you say, well, he's 100% right. And then you go to the other side and you look at the other person's view through his eyes. And if you're to have total empathy, you would see that you would have to admit that there's 100% right. If you take into account all of the elements of his life and his view and his, traumas and his sensitivities and so on. And only once you did both can you say, well, now I'm going to try and combine them. I'm going to try and say you are more right in this respect and you are more right in this respect. Maybe first we need to listen to you and then we'll be able to listen to you. Maybe it's a compromise. Maybe there's some creative solution in which it's a win-win situation. That very much depends on the topic at hand. But it has to go through tzedek tirdof, listening to the truth of both sides. And the same goes for this argument. Do we need a system of authority, or can education be trust-based? Now let's ask the question, Hasidut. Is Hasidut more right-wing or more left-wing? So this question was posed a few years ago, I think almost 10 years ago it was, by Rabbi Ginsburg, in a seminar that he gave about politics. He gave a very long seminar, in English actually, on the topic of right and left-wing politics. And he drew this whole map of differences, points of contention between right and left. And then after rolling out this map or this system, he says, let's look at the Baal Shem Tov on the one hand and the Vilna Gaon on the other hand. And it requires some abstraction because, for example, we don't know what any of them said about socialism versus capitalism. But we can abstract a little bit what they would say. And then he came to a very interesting conclusion. The conclusion was that in 8 out of 10 criteria, the Baal Shem Tov was leftist. And Hagra, the spiritual figure of the Misnagdi world, the non-Hasidic, the Litvish world, were right-wing. But in 2 respects, it's the opposite. Only in 2. So, for example, in terms of looking more towards the past or looking more towards the future for inspiration, the Litvish world looks more at the past, but the Hasidic world more at the future. And this goes together. Who is more conservative and who is more revolutionary? Obviously, the Misnagdi world is more conservative, has to do with looking at the past. And the Hasidic world is very much a revolution. It's forward-looking, it's future-looking. And also this has to do with the nature of man. Is man's nature very much flawed and constant need of, rectification and balancing and having a lot of musar, a lot of, harsh authority words that would fight against their evil inclination, their animal soul? Or can you trust their inner essence that's good, that have a divine soul that can be trusted and echoed? So obviously the Misnagdi world is more suspicious, and this is a very basic difference between Musar and Hasidut. Musar is all about preaching to the heart and explaining to the heart in a very cerebral way what it desires is false and wrong. It assumes all of the heart's desires are very base and low, and then it explains how bad things happen to you, whether in this world or the world to come, if you follow your heart's desires. And then it tells you should follow what your head is telling you, which is very different from what your heart is telling you, and you need to obey. And it's very, very, very linear, and again, the heart is preached. The heart is not evoked to connect with some inner goodness. But the Hasidic atmosphere was absolutely different. And the whole language and soundtrack, the whole vibe of Hasidut is the Baal Shem Tov couldn't stand this, Musar preachers. He says that's not the way to awaken all Jews have, and it's not just Jews ultimately, it's everyone has a divine spark or a divine soul or a divine goodness within them. And it needs to be echoed. It needs to be awakened. and you should address only the good element within the other person. Don't address the negative element at all. Trust them. Trust them. Reflect it back to them. Compliment them about that. Tell them how good they are all the time, and then they'll be reminded of their inner goodness. They'll be reminded. They'll be able to do tshuva. Tshuva is all about. This is the month of tshuva. Tshuva is all about returning to our truest essence, which is good. That's why it's returning. That's why coming closer to God means returning to God and returning to our own souls, because we've been there. That's who we truly are. We just forgot about it. We were souls, very good meaning, good-willed souls, and we just need to be reminded of it. This is the Hasidic approach. We'll know this. So, except on two points, the Baal Shem Tov is leftist. What were the 2 points? The one point was one of the points of differences between right and left is how much you were for religion or how much you were for secularism. So obviously, both the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov are both religious. But then the question becomes, how real do you experience the realm of the secular? Do you see the realm of the secular as independent or not as independent? Is chulin, is the realm of the secular real or not real? And the Hagra's vision was that it was very real, and this is the idea that the tzimtzum should be the idea of contraction. God contracting his light and leaving this dark domain that's this world, whether he actually contracted his light or he didn't. And according to Hagra, he actually contracted his light, meaning the darkness is very real, and the realm of the secular is very real. In that sense, he reflected and he perceived that there is actual evil in the world and actual darkness in the world, and they need to be combated. Whereas the view of the Baal Shem Tov was that the contraction is not to be taken literally. It's only to our eyes. But really God is fully, really omnipresent, not just watching over everything. He is within everything. And that means that there's no such thing as pure, complete evil or darkness. Underneath every darkness and everything that's evil, there's an underlying light and goodness that needs to be exposed. And it is within you, not outside of you. So in this sense, the Baal Shem Tov becomes the more right-wing one, because he's saying religion is everywhere, or God is everywhere. There's no room for the secular. And the other opinion, the other point in which the Baal Shem Tov became the right-winger, is regarding the question of small government versus big government. Because the right is capitalist, the right doesn't want a lot of taxes and doesn't want a lot of regulation over big businesses. So they favor small governments because they want a laissez-faire. Let the businessmen do their thing, and that'll create wealth for everyone. And the left-wingers, being more socialist in nature, they want a big government with a lot more taxation, and then the government has to be big in order to distribute the taxes in many areas in life. So here, the Baal Shem Tov is more right-wing because he believes that you just need a Rebbe. You don't need a lot of councils and people making decisions. The Hagra thought that we went with the traditional system of having 7 wise men in every Jewish community. That's how it was. You had 7 wise men. It was more of a democracy. They would decide things together. It's a bigger government, so to speak. And but here it really connects, because a small government is basically saying we trust you more. There is a side also in modern day right-wing, left-wing politics that the right gives more credit to people, which seems to be the opposite of what we said, but it's an interesting element that's there. The capitalist politics is based on the fact that we're all egoistical, and it's good. I mean, it's not good, but that's how it is. So let's work with egoism, and then people will try to make the most money, and it'll be good for economics. But the right-wingers, especially religious right-wingers, also say that charity needs to be based on authentic giving. You don't need a welfare state, because if it's a welfare state, people don't don't feel that they have to give any money personally to someone. Say, well, the state will take care of you. Don't come to me, go to the welfare office. They'll help you. So the left-wing people are saying, well, yeah, that's good. The government will distribute all the money and the taxes. But here it's the right-wingers saying, let the goodwill, flourish naturally. People are egoistical. So most right-wingers, actually, it's mostly religious right-wingers. And this is where this is the Baal Shem Tov's idea comes into play here, that he's left-wing in almost everything, but he's right-winged in terms of favoring a small government, so to speak. But the reason he's right-winged in this is, again, because he trusts people to do good. He doesn't want to have all these, mashgichim. Mashgichim, in the Litvish yeshiva, you have a mashgiach. That's very much like a police officer. You don't have something like this in the Hasidic yeshiva. And in ideal Hasidic yeshiva, many Hasidic yeshivas are still Hasidic only nominally. But the way they work is they're very much misnagdi. But in an ideal Hasidic yeshiva, you wouldn't have mashgichim. You would just have mashpi'im. Mashpi'im are like advisors, counselors. They help you do what we assume you want to do, which is the good things, the good deeds. And I'm just going to work with you until you're strong enough to do what you really want to do. So just to round things up, the Litvish world, the Litvish view that's coming from the Vilna Gaon is more aligned with the verse of the Parsha, and it's more right-winged in nature. But Hasidut is more aligned with the prophetic ideal of just counselors and no police officers. And so it's more left-wing in nature. That's how it is. And also it connects to the inner dimension of the Torah, like we said, that the outer dimension of the Torah is more grounded in the past and the present. But the Zohar, which talks about 613 pieces of advice, it's more oriented towards the future. So what do we do with this? How do we combine this? So the general rule says that we need to include the left within the right. This is called le'achlala smola beyamina. The right is more realistic. That's how it is. Right-wingers tend to be more sober regarding short-term solutions. We see this in Israel very, very clearly. That the left-wingers have a very clear utopia. They want peace in the Middle East, and they believe that if we distribute the land to 2 states, that will bring peace. Without going into this, they have a very clear goal. The right in Israel doesn't have a clear goal. It just says we can't have those agreements with the Palestinians because they're not to be trusted. And the Iranians and the rest, we need to make sure the Iranians don't have a bomb. We need to make sure that the Palestinians don't have a state and an army, because then they'll... So that's just saying how we observe, how we protect ourselves in the present. But then if you ask the classical right-winger in Israel, but so we're going to have a strong army and we make sure the Iranians don't have a bomb, what then? And you don't have a good answer. The answer is, I don't know, we live by our swords and hopefully something will change. And they never talk this language. They don't have a clear ideal because they're focused on looking at the world through very realistic lenses and just seeing that not all people are good-natured and in fact most of them aren't, and you have to be very careful with this. But here we see that Hasidut is more of a left-wing view. And that's where we should be heading. And that's where we should be striving. So what is the correct balance? How do we place the left within the right? Placing the left within the right, meaning you first need to have the right. The right is like a vessel. That's what is going to contain elements from the left. So you have to start out by saying, well, although I'm listening to the verse, tzedek tzedek tirdof, I can see the truth of both sides, and that's what we try to do throughout this class. But if the question is, just like Hillel and Shammai, these and these are the words of the living God. But you have to start somewhere. So you start with Hillel. And you say Hillel, and Hillel is a right winger here. We can't explain how it all connects. But in terms of politics or education, we need to say, well, we have to admit, although we really want to trust everyone and have faith in everyone, we have to admit that they're right about at least one thing, that we need rules, we need institutions, we need frameworks people can work in. It can't be just a free-for-all, democratic world. And if you try and raise a family this way, it'll be a lot of fun, but it won't turn out good. People, if you don't demand anything from your kid, they're not going to demand anything from themselves. And if you don't have any authority, then they're going to have to fall into the illusion that they are adults long before they're truly adults. And that's the root of all the very bad things they could do to themselves if they have the illusion of adulthood before they're really adults. So you need to be the adult, and that means you need to have to be an authoritative figure, and that means you're right-winged. So the structure that you build in your home, in your school, it has to start out as more of a right-winged institution or misgeret, a framework. But the atmosphere within this structure, the spirit, the energy, the vibe, the approach needs to be completely the opposite. We have all these rules. We have a lot of rules. It's good to have, not too many, but we have the rules of the Torah. I abide by them also. It's not just you respecting me, I'm also respecting my parents. And we're both observing Shabbat. And there are some things that you as a kid, I don't allow you, and it'll be allowed later on, but that's I'm obligated by this also. So we have all these rules, and it's very clear, and the house is based on not something, fuzzy or foggy, or, everything is good, or whatever you do, and it's not good for the kid. The kids needs to be demanded and inspired to do more than they can. And you can teach them all these rules and prohibitions, and it's good for them. They like it. They like the laws. It's good. But you don't go about being so suspicious that if you don't look at them, and if you don't check them, they're probably not going to observe the rules. No, you give out the rules, you give out the statements, and you give out the, prohibitions and everything. And you trust them to like it, to identify with it, to see the truth of it. And ultimately the vibe, the energy has to be more left-leaning, more so on the outside it's like a formal authoritative institution, but on the inside you give a lot of space, a lot of room, a room to make mistakes, a room to fall down, and you're not angry at them. And it's human to, fall or to, say, I don't feel like doing this. And then you uplift them. And if they go a little bit backwards, or then you don't become hysterical, and and you're not suspicious of them. You have schools that you have hidden cameras everywhere, making sure that they check your bags to see if you have a smartphone that's not allowed. That's very harmful. The left-wingers are right in this sense. If you're suspicious and you're constantly checking them and you don't believe that they want to observe any of your mitzvot, the message you're giving out to them is nobody wants to do this. Nobody likes this. It's just this very external system that is oppressive. And they're going to just, kick it and come out. That's what they're going to do. That's what it happens in very, very democratic systems, that people, do what they want, and then they can have, a lot of, if society is too liberal, there'll be a lot of drugs and a lot of promiscuity. And it happens in overly authoritative societies as well. The same result of drugs and permissiveness is, and you see them, and you can see where they meet, in those, kikarot, how do you say, town squares or places in the city at night, you meet people from the most liberal societies and from the most Haredi societies, and they meet together and they do drugs together. Because because the truth is really a balance, and the balance is that you need a lot of authority on the outside and a lot of trust on the inside. And having a good eye on you. The good eye that tells you, I think you're really hurting yourself when you're doing this. Just like the friend that says, you really shouldn't do this, or you have to do this, it's so good for you. And that should be the atmosphere on the inside. This is how you can raise a wonderful Jewish home and a wonderful Jewish school, or even a non-Jewish one if you're non-Jewish and you were just looking for a good formula in order to build your family and to build your school system and to build your community, is that you need all the rules, and you do have it has to be very good spirited also, and with a lot of trust and no suspicions on the inside. So this is our class for this week's Parsha of Shoftim. Hi, if you enjoyed this class, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, also make sure to click the bell icon. To keep the classes flowing and free of charge, please consider supporting us on Patreon, an amazing platform for supporting independent creators. You're also welcome to join our weekly live Zoom class every Sunday evening, Israel time. You can find all the links in the description below. Thank you very much, keep healthy, and see you soon.